It's 2024, and if you haven't started investing in any way, shape, or form, then let's make this year the year you add investing to your money goals. While there are a variety of ways to build wealth, I firmly believe that long-term investing is one of the best ways to do it. Whether it's contributing to a retirement plan or leveraging a general investment account, consistent investing is a must. That's why I'm so excited to talk with Marc Russell of BetterWallet today about how you can add investing to your money goals. Get ready to take your finances up a notch this year. Hey there, I'm Rhea Reeves, and over a decade ago, I turned my life around through budgeting. I went from being an overspender deep in credit card debt to being the founder and full-time money coach of City Girl Savings. Now, I help women work towards their dream life and tap into their financial power one budget at a time. I fully believe you can live a life you love with a budget, and I'm living proof. The weekly City Girl Savings podcast focuses on the intersection of money and the City Girl lifestyle. Join me every week along with some special guests as I share my experiences, advice, and guidance on navigating life and money as an experience-loving millennial. Now, Marc and I actually met at FinCon in Austin back in 2021. We stayed in touch through social media, and I was actually featured on his BetterWallet podcast a few months ago. I'll make sure to link to that episode in the show notes. After college, Marc joined the second largest mutual fund company and eventually became a licensed stockbroker. A few years after that, Marc became a licensed advisor at a Wall Street fintech company. But in 2019, he took his passion for teaching personal finance and turned it into BetterWallet. Now, Marc is debt-free, has a community of thousands, and has been featured in CNBC, USA Today, Bankrate, and more. So Marc, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm super excited to have this conversation with you. I feel like the start of a new year is such an important time for people to plan and strategize their goals, their finances, and I definitely think investing should be on the list. But we'll get to that. Before we do, though, can you just share a little bit of background about yourself and how you ended up starting BetterWallet?
Yeah, thank you for the intro. It has been a wild journey. I definitely came from very humble beginnings. Just to kind of give the backstory, before I even got into the corporate world, I had to go through foster care system. So I was put into foster care as soon as I was born, spent 13 years bouncing around different foster homes. And then eventually I was adopted at 13. But the family that I was adopted into, very loving, prioritized education, but we didn't really have too much money, especially money to go off to college. So I always knew that I wanted to go off to college. I wanted to be different from a lot of my friends. So I applied to school with no clue how I was going to pay for it. And I applied to one of the closer schools to me, which was Penn State, which was like basically my backyard. And I remember being on campus and I got 2 emails. The first one was like, welcome to Penn State. The second one was, you owe us $20,000. And I'm like, what? Like in my head, I'm like, I'm Black, like I'm left-handed. I went through the foster care system. There's no money for me. Like you guys didn't look for scholarships, whatever. And that's when I realized that I had to really fight for my degree more than what I thought. I thought I could just go off to school and be totally fine. So after I went through, I graduated from school. I was lucky enough to get into Vanguard's, one of their really prestigious programs where they only choose about 20 people out of the country to represent Vanguard. And eventually they want you to go off and become like a senior manager, which in my head, I'm like, I'm just a kid from the hood. You really want me to be a senior manager at this multi-trillion-dollar organization? And they really took a liking to my personality and like what I brought to the table. And the fact that I wanted to help people in underrepresented communities invest. So over time, I got to the point where I said, okay, well, I want to become a stockbroker. I want to become a financial advisor. And then, as you mentioned, in 2019, I thought, okay, well, I'm making these millionaires, multimillionaires. What am I doing to help my own people go off and invest? So that's where BetterWallet came. So not only did I document my own debt-free journey and try to hold myself accountable to paying off $80,000 of debt, I also wanted a platform where people can go and learn about finance without needing to go and talk to these stockbrokers at Vanguard or Fidelity or what have you, which they might make it more complicated than what it actually is.
Definitely. I mean, obviously you were in it, right? So you know more than someone like me or whoever is listening. But I'm curious, did they have any issues with you starting Better Wallet, or did you leave the company, then start Better Wallet? How did that work for you?
Yeah, so I was very transparent about the mission, but I never told them how I was going to go about doing it. So I tried to do the right thing because in finance is ultra regulated. And I said, hey, like, here's my mission. I want to help people budget, pay off debt, because that's basically what I was doing at the time. And a little bit about investing, less of like the complex strategies that I have on my page now, and more of like, what's a stock? What's a bond? Why would you even invest in the first place? Right? Like the growth rate of that, and just being very, very transparent with Vanguard and the fintech firms that I work with, even the hedge fund manager, just telling them, hey, here's what I plan on doing. No one's going to say no to teaching financial literacy. It's only when you start making money from that that they're like, okay, well, you need to disclose that and we need to make sure we know exactly how much money is coming in. So I did monetize my page during that time, like 2019, 2020. I know what value I bring to the table, so it made sense. And I had to communicate that to them. But then when I started getting the more complex strategies, that wasn't until I quit my job in 2021. And then I basically had the permission to do so, where it's a little bit more coaching and more guidance versus providing education. So that was the progression, but it wasn't easy in any way because everything I posted, everything I talked about, any money that was brought in, I had to run that through compliance beforehand just to get their blessing before I moved on, which
Wow.
was pretty annoying.
Yeah. And I would imagine time consuming. I feel like corporations kind of move on their own time frame.
Yeah, especially compliance. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun building it out, but that was a headache and one of the reasons on why I decided to quit my job in 2021.
This is a total sidebar, but I'm curious, like, do you still have your license or is that something that you would continue to just keep active?
Yeah. So after you leave what they call a broker dealer, when you leave like an investment firm, you have 2 years until that license expires. So I have my 7, my 65, and my 63. The only ones that are like relevant would be the 65 to be a licensed financial advisor. The 7 is to be a stockbroker. So in my head, I already have all that knowledge. I don't really need to have those licenses, but it's not until that 2 years is up when you lose those licenses. And as of last week, they both expired. So I'm free from the SEC and FINRA and all that. And yeah, now that it expired, I could probably still renew it if I really wanted to. Now, kind of thinking about the future, I don't want to deal with the regulation that comes along with being a financial advisor. And I think I'm a little bit more free now, not having to deal with like FINRA and the SEC. And I also believe that when it comes to what needs to be taught, you don't need to be a financial advisor for that.
Right.
So I think a lot of times people are like, oh, well, I need a financial advisor to learn financial literacy. That's not true. You could be a financial coach, a financial educator, and not be a financial advisor. The only difference is a financial advisor, if you were like, hey, like I want to invest for my kids, a financial advisor can go and say, okay, well, based off of everything I know of you, here's what you should do. And a financial educator would be, well, based on everything that I know of you, here's some options that you should consider. Very, very different in the eyes of like the SEC and FINRA. And both of those, for anyone who's like, who the hell are they? Can I cuss on here? Those two organizations are the ones that are in control of regulating the investment management market or that space. They were built out over the years just to protect the end consumer. So when I'm using FINRA or SEC, that's just like the regulatory board, if you will.
It's kind of interesting that you went down this path because I actually had a financial advisor on the show not too long ago. Her name's Grace Kilgore. And she and I talked about the differences between a financial coach and an advisor. You took a minute to explain the differences. We took about an hour, but I would love to kind of hear in your opinion, when do you think someone is actually ready to work with an advisor? Because you have experience on both ends of the spectrum. And I think you firsthand would know, hey, this person is working with a financial coach, but now maybe they're ready to take it up a notch. So when is somebody ready for that?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to time and money because up until the point where you don't have that much time or you have a good amount of money that needs to be managed, you're probably fine just getting the education and self-managing just from like a cost standpoint. So when I was a financial advisor and I was considering bringing on different clients, a lot of them needed things like tax management. If you only have a portfolio of $100,000, you probably don't need tax management, more so because you don't have to worry about what they call capital gains being kicked out of your investments. But if you are making, or if you have 100 million, then they're constantly worried about how it's being taxed throughout the year because that tax bill can be 10,000, it could be 100,000 per year, depending on what they're doing. So tax management is really important, but that tends to be with like the higher net worth. And then when it comes down to time, right? Like if you're a CEO of a major company, they don't have time to self-manage or make sure they're doing things like rebalancing, which is a fancy way of just saying that your percentages all match up in the way that they should, right? You have the right percentages allocated to different funds. A CEO of a major company is not able to do that. So you delegate that to a financial advisor. So you have to keep in mind that each financial advisor, they charge a certain amount. So normally they charge 1% of your total. They use words like AUM, assets under management, basically meaning like how much money you have with them. So they'll charge that 1% up to maybe like 1.5%. So you have to be able to justify that by saying, okay, well, what are they doing for me? Tax management is one, rebalancing is another. And then also you have financial advisors that will build your entire investment portfolio. So instead of just saying, hey, here's what you invest in, it's like, do you plan on having kids in the future? Do you plan on buying a house? How do you plan on retiring? Do you want to buy a boat when you're 52 and a half? It's very, very specific and they can build out their entire plan. The people who tend to do that are what they call certified financial planners. So it's kind of like a financial advisor that goes through the curriculum to become a certified financial planner and they pass the exam and they get a designation. It's very similar to like any other designation where you get the letters at the end. You get the same thing when you're a financial planner and they'll build out a completely like a big financial plan for you that's incredibly comprehensive for you, your spouse, your kids, your grandmother, whoever it might be. But the question is like, does everyone need a financial advisor or a financial planner? And the answer is no, because if you're not looking for all that, then don't pay for it. You don't have to pay for it. You can just self-manage. And a lot of folks, I feel like, and I can only say it's because I went through this progression. I feel like we overcomplicate what investing truly is.
Yes.
Like if you feel like it's confusing, I totally agree with you, but I would not necessarily call it hard. Because if you understand what you need to do, everything could be on autopilot and you don't really have to go back and do everything every single day or actively trade or what have you. So long-term passive investing, which I'm sure we're going to talk about, is the way to go because you don't really need to do anything. In fact, if you feel like you're doing too much, you're probably doing it the wrong way.
I love that you said that, Mark, especially because you have worked in these industries, right? I actually believe that it's systemically designed to keep people uneducated about investing because, to your point, it's really not that hard when you know the basics of what to do. But it's very intimidating for someone who doesn't know. It's not really easy to understand. The jargon is very complex, right? And that's scary to people. So I think without individuals like ourselves helping to bridge that knowledge gap, people can really put investing to the side. And I don't think they should. Would you agree with that? And how do you think these companies can maybe help bridge that gap, or do they even want to?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question and something that like I've thought about. You would have to define the company, right? These investment managers, I think they really do want to help because at the end of the day, it's all about bottom line for them. And if you can bring in people that will buy into their funds, they're more than happy to bring you in. I think the challenge for them is, and I use the word challenge, but I think it's something that they could work harder on. Like if you can go about managing a multi-trillion-dollar portfolio, you can reach communities that need help when it comes to investing. Like I would get that all the time. Even when it came to recruiting, people will come up to me and say, okay, like how do we recruit diverse talent? And I'm like, get off the golf course and get off the golf course and go to an HBCU. And maybe you can reach some of those people that you're trying to reach. Right. So I think they do want to work with people who might be underrepresented in the finance space. They're having a challenge trying to find those folks. But things that they have been doing is they'll provide education. They have newsletters. They're trying to get more on social media. They're trying to meet people where they're at. And I applaud companies like Fidelity and TIAA and Schwab just trying to get in front of people that maybe didn't learn about investing growing up. The companies that I believe benefit from the lack of knowledge, the ignorance that we have, would be the ones like credit card companies, right? Because they don't want you to invest because they make trillions of dollars from just interest. Right. So that I would probably label them as, hey, like they want you to be as ignorant as possible, because if you don't know about investing, if you don't know about money management, you're going to look at the credit card as being like the best thing since sliced bread. And then you're going to just swipe your credit card for everything that you do. And then they try to reward you through reward points. And a lot of people are like, well, like credit cards aren't that bad, because you're getting reward points if I'm putting groceries and everything on it. And my reply back to them every single time is, do you think they just don't make any money whatsoever? Everyone just uses their credit cards correctly. And the answer to that is no. So you have to be careful. You have to know how to maneuver around these credit card companies and do what's best for you and not what's best for them. So I do think the economy, the banks of the world, I don't think they have our best interest in mind, especially when it comes to like interest and them receiving money from that. But I do think that the investment managers, though they do a bad job marketing to folks that need to know, they are trying. I can definitely say they are trying to get in front of more and more people that need to learn more about investing. They just don't know how.
Well, that's hopeful and good to know. So obviously, this episode is really about helping people understand the importance of investing. So let's pretend that someone is listening to this episode and they have like no idea why investing is so important. What would you tell them? Like, how would you introduce this concept of investing to that person?
Definitely. So the way I think about investing is you have the past, the present, and the future. The past, you can't do anything about, right? So like, we can take that out. You have the present, where it's the money that you have right now that you can use for your everyday life and bring you happiness right now. The future is what we don't really think about. We never really think about like retirement. We don't think about our goals in the future. We just hope that the money appears, where it's just like, okay, well, I want to buy a house. How are you going to buy a house? Well, hopefully I can just buy a house. When you think about the future, that's when investing comes in. And investing is nothing more than a fancy term that describes you putting money with a company. That money grows over time, helps you to reach your specific goals. Compare that to what our parents told us, where it's like, hey, put money in the bank. Putting money in the bank isn't really investing. That's just you putting money under a mattress, basically. Investing is you put money in, and then based off of the investment, that money can grow, and then you're making money with your money, right? Your money is growing with these companies. And then you'll have things called compound interest, which is when your money's money makes money. So if you can imagine just like a tree, I would show you outside, but like, I don't really have any trees like near me. But if you imagine a tree, when a tree grows, it grows branches. With investing, it's the same way. It grows branches. That's like the earnings on your money. When your branches create branches. That's when you have these giant trees, right? I was just in New York and they're talking about the tree that they plan on bringing to New York to put it near the Rockefeller Center and all that, right? That's a giant tree. That's been growing for years. That's basically what investing is. But that one tree started from a very, very small seed. And then it started growing roots, right? And now you have this massive tree that's hundreds of feet tall. I don't know how tall it is, but let's just guess we knew. That's basically what investing is, but it takes time, but it starts off with that one seed. And you nurturing that seed. That's the way I look at investing. For anyone who's like, hey, like, but that still sounds complicated. Here's what I would say about investing. The things that you can control in investing are these three things: how much you put in, how often you put it in, and then what they call your asset allocation, which is basically a fancy way of just saying like what you're invested in. Everything else, notice I didn't say anything about the market. Notice I didn't say anything about what your neighbor's doing or your coworker. All that is out of your control. I would consider that to be like trying to control like LA traffic. You can't do anything about the market, right? You can't do anything about it. You just let it do what it does and you just let it go. But if you're invested correctly, right, your asset allocation, you should be fine. If you're controlling how much you're putting in, how often you put it in, you'll be fine. So the traditional way that most people start investing happens to be like your 401k, your 403b, which is your retirement plan you have with your employer. Notice that your employer tells you what is your contribution rate, like how often you want to put it in, what your percentage is, how big of a payment do you want to make. And then they try to control as much as possible what you put the money in. So they'll give you like maybe 10 funds that you can invest in. That's normally how people go about starting investing. I would not overcomplicate it with the other investment that you might have, right? If you're investing for your kids, or if you want to buy a house or buy a boat, it really comes down to those three principles. Everything else you can ignore because none of it's important. Because even there's times where people are like, how often do you look at your investing account? I'm like, I look at my investing account every month, once a month. And the only reason I'm in there is because I need to make a contribution. Otherwise, I'm not looking at it. Because I know over time it's going to go up. And we can talk about index funds and long-term investing and why all that makes sense a little bit later, I'm sure.
Yeah, you said a lot of good things there. I want to just touch on a few. So speaking about retirement plans, I actually read an article recently on the Wall Street Journal that said millennials are like set up for the most success for retirement compared to Gen Z and baby boomers, because when they entered the workforce, a lot of the companies that they started working for would automatically enroll them into retirement plans, which just automatically like started them on their investment journey. So I thought that was really promising, especially because there's a lot of talk about millennials and what they're not doing right. So I wanted to throw that out there. But another thing that I wanted to just touch on based on what you said is assets under management. So basically what your money is invested in. Now, I think that piece could deter someone from getting started. So would you recommend an advisor at that point? Probably not because of their cost, but like, what does someone do to either make sure they have the right investments or at least get started with it regardless of not knowing what to do?
Right. No, it's a really good point. So I'll comment quickly on the 401k automatic contributions, because that was something when I was back at Vanguard back in 2012, like they were really, really trying to push. And I think the government was able to step in and make it happen because they're realizing that people are not able to retire because they don't have any money invested. And I would also tell you the worst possible thing that can ever happen to your investments would be yourself. Like we are the biggest risk to our investments because we overthink it, right? Because like when I was 22 and I first came into the financial world and someone told me, hey, like I'm going to take $50 out of your paycheck to put towards something that's going to happen 40 years from now, I would have been like, no, I need that money. Talking about like, you're going to put in this investment, right? And luckily, I worked at Vanguard where I had great mentors and they said, just put the money in and allow it to grow. And luckily, I was able to do that. But most time we get in our own way from doing that. And it could be really as small as putting in $20 per month or whatever. Just get it started. So I'm happy they're starting to implement that and it's going to help pay off down the road. I forgot your second question because I wanted to talk about that.
Oh, that's okay. Assets under management and how someone goes about picking like where their money should be invested.
Yeah. So asset allocation, the most important word in finance would be diversification, meaning that you own everything. You own companies in different regions, different sectors, healthcare, technology, what have you. And then you also want to own different investments in different countries. So not only within the United States, but also China, Japan, like what are they doing in the UK? Like you want to own all those companies because as much as I think America is great, there's a lot of great companies all across the world, even in more developing areas, right? So the question is, how do you buy all that, Mark? Well, if you have things like you have different vehicles, like you have what they call like index funds, which is basically investing into some of the top companies in the world. So imagine if you're trying to buy the Alibabas out there, you're trying to buy Netflix, you're trying to buy Apple and Amazon, buying them individually will take you weeks, months, years in order to buy them all individually in order to achieve that level of diversification. With index funds, which is basically just another fancy term that I'll break down, index funds basically is like you making a couple clicks of a button and you buying some of these companies, right? You're buying 500, 1,000 companies all at once. And that's incredibly important to remember. So when you're trying to build a diverse global portfolio. A portfolio is nothing more than, if you kind of think about like a folder and you have papers in that folder, just imagine that those papers being like investments that you might have, or like your 401k, or just like an investing account for like your kids. That's what I mean by portfolio. When you're building your portfolio, you want to own things within the United States. You want global. So then you pick funds, like index funds, that match that. So if you're trying to build a complete portfolio, you want to own things like the S&P 500 index fund, which is another way of just saying like you own the top 500 largest companies in the country. But then you want to find the equivalent of that, but globally. So the UK, Asia, Australia. And then you have funds like, they have one that's called like VXUS, which is all of those companies outside of the United States within these international countries. You're buying those as well. And that could build a very complete portfolio, because you not only own the American-based companies, you're also owning the international-based companies as well. That could build a portfolio that you might be looking for that is diverse, and it gives you the growth rate that you're looking for, because it's a global portfolio versus having something that's just within the United States.
Are you loving this episode so far? Well, the money and life level up conversations never end in the City Girl Savings community. Visit citygirlsavings.com for instant access to resources that help you budget, level up your money mindset, and so much more. And make sure you stay up to date with CGS by following us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, all at City Girl Savings. I think that's a great piece of advice. And I would also just add that anyone who puts the stake in the ground and says, okay, I'm investing in these funds, stick with your choice. There are so many options. So don't get like analysis paralysis and not do anything, or just constantly wonder if you're making the right choice. Just do your research, pick your fund, invest in your fund, and see it through to the end. Would you agree?
Totally agree. Yeah, you can't overanalyze it. I think what ends up happening is, if we can compare it to like, I don't know, I like shopping. I don't shop too often, but when I get a chance to go shopping, like that's my thing. So if I'm going shopping and I know that I need to buy a pair of pants, I'm looking at, okay, how long can I have these pants? Like, are they going to fade over time? Do they fit, right? You're looking at all those things. I think sometimes people look under the hood when it comes to investing, because they're just like, I want to know more. I want to understand, like, what's the company like? Let's look at their financials. Like, when it comes to index funds, and when you own 500, 1,000 different companies, that would be the equivalent of you going and asking people, okay, like, let's talk about the red of the jeans. Like, let's look at the inside of the jeans. What does that look like, right? You're probably not doing that. You might care about where it was like sourced. Was it China? Was it here? But for the most part, you're like, okay, is it a good fit? Will it make me look good? Is it going to help me reach whatever goal I have? That's the way you want to think about investing, because as soon as you start looking under the hood, there's complex terms in there that even I don't understand. And I have degrees and certifications where I should probably know the majority of it, but there's things that I don't have a business knowing what that is. Like, I don't really need to know that. So when it comes to investing, again, control the three things: how much you put in, how often you put it in, and then how diverse your portfolio is, or what they call asset allocation. If you can control those things, you'll be totally fine.
I called it assets under management, but that's with an advisor. Asset allocation is when you're picking your own investment. So I wanted to clear that up. But one thing you mentioned is people can control how much they invest, right? And they don't have to start with a lot. But in your opinion, are there things that people should have in place before they start investing, even if it is on like a small scale?
Yeah, definitely. So what I call it is my cash flow waterfall. That means when you have extra money, which hopefully you're at a point where your income is higher than your expenses, you want to start allocating your money towards the things that are most important, as you mentioned. So, number one, you want to make sure you have an emergency fund, because if you were to lose your job, unfortunately, you want to make sure that you can go and get a job down the road, but you shouldn't have to feel rushed, right? So you should take 3 to 6 months in order to find whatever that new job is. So an emergency fund, that's you putting money away. If you have a spouse or another source of income, you can have less months, because if you lose your job, you can rely on your spouse or you can rely on the other source of income. But if you're single and you only have one form of income, you want to make sure you have close to like 6%. And it's not just a number that I'm throwing out there. It's actually approved by a certified financial planning board, where they believe that's how much you need. Because again, the goal isn't to just find a new job. It's to find a job that is suitable for what your current expenses are, and hopefully maybe even a promotion from where you're currently at. And a lot of times you can't do that within 1 month. You might need 3, need 6, you might need an entire year, but you want to make sure you have that wiggle room. That's number one. Number two, what I tell people is, and you get the question of like, should I pay off debt before I start investing? You should absolutely not have to pay off all your debt before you start investing. And here's why. Because when you have your 401k, a lot of us have what they call a 401k match, which is basically the company that you work for. They are incentivized from the government to provide you with a match for any money that you're putting into the 401k. So what that typically looks like is they'll say, okay, well, you put in 5%, we'll scratch your back and we'll put in 5%. And what I tell people is, after your emergency fund, make sure you're contributing up to that match. I don't care how much debt you can have millions of dollars in debt. That is free money, my friends. Well, it's free, but technically it's part of your compensation package. But just imagine that it's free money that you are losing out on because you decided to prioritize your debt before you got that match. Right after the match, in that cash flow waterfall, is to pay off your high interest debt. Luckily, there's some people out there that might have low interest debt, 2, 3%, even 1%. But if you have debt out there that is plus 10% or 20%, or sometimes even 25%, that means that each year, like let's say you have $10,000 of debt, it would be 25% of that. So $2,500 would be how much you would have to pay to the credit card companies each year in a form of like a percentage, right? So you want to make sure that you are paying that off next. And then after that, I would say start prioritizing like investing. So you want to start looking at your IRAs, your individual retirement accounts, which is basically a 401k that you own. You don't actually own your 401k. I get that question all the time. Like, you don't own your 401k. You own the assets within it, but you don't own the actual vehicle. But then you want to start focusing on your IRAs, putting money into that, Roth IRAs, traditional IRAs. And then the next one is HSAs. I feel like it's getting a little complicated, but a HSA is a health savings account. Anyone who has a high deductible health plan where you signed up for it with your employer, where you pay a high deductible, but you have low premiums, you likely have access to a health savings account, which is one of my favorite accounts. So that would be next. And then you get into like maxing out your 401k. That would be the next one, if you're in a position where you can do so. So there is like a sequence of how you should go about doing it. And again, that's incredibly general based off of like general goals. Like if you want to buy real estate, you might want to throw that in there somewhere. But it should all start off with having an emergency fund, getting your match, and then paying off your high interest debt. Those would be the top 3. And I would want you to do that before you do any other type of investing.
I 1000% agree. I think Dave Ramsey is a big advocate for not contributing to a retirement plan when you have debt. And I think, to your point, you're losing money doing that. At least get your match. But another good point you mentioned is you can look at your 401k plan as a form of investing, right? And it's a high priority form. But when you get to like an IRA or a general investment account, that's when you want to make sure that you don't have lingering debt or things like that coming up. Because if you're putting money into those investment accounts, it's going to be at the expense of the interest that you're accruing on those debts. So I think you're spot on. And I think anyone listening to this who has goals of investing, follow that plan, follow that waterfall, if you will. Start with your emergency fund, then make sure you're getting your 401k match, then pay off your high interest debt, and then transition to a general investing account. So, what are some of your favorite platforms for someone who is ready to do just general investing?
Yeah, no, really good question, because I feel like I go through this question often, because the way that most people have learned how to invest, that happened back in 2020 where everyone was in the house, right? Like, and then you have the gurus online saying, oh, like use this investment platform and jump into this investment. And I think now there is so much bad information going out that a lot of people are now trying to figure out, okay, what is right? So I'm actually not, I'll start with the people I don't like. So let's give one, because there's other platforms. I don't like Robinhood really at all. Robinhood, they gamify investing. And what I just tell you guys, if you feel like there's a lot of moving parts with investing, or you feel like you're doing too much, which you do too much with Robinhood, then you're doing it the wrong way. Robinhood has so many lawsuits because they gamify investing. And because of that, they are at a point where they might not survive into the future. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind. I don't like them for that reason. I also don't like them because they don't provide a whole suite of different investment vehicles, right? So you can't get like a 529 that helps you to pay for college. You can't open up a UTMA, which is a unified transfer for, I forget the acronym, but basically it's like an account that you set up for your kids. And then when they turn 18, they receive that money. You can't do that at Robinhood. For the longest time, you couldn't buy index funds. You couldn't buy ETFs. You couldn't buy mutual funds. You could only buy individual stocks, which what I just tell you, like the word that's most important in finance is diversification. And they didn't allow you to do any of that stuff. And if you ever have an issue with what happened, right? Because like things pop up, you can't just call Robinhood and talk to a licensed professional. You have to submit a form and they might get back to you within the next few days, but we're talking about your money here, right? Like that's extremely important. Like probably the only thing that is above that is your own health. So it's like health and your finances, and you can't just call someone to help out with your money. So that's why I'm not a big fan of Robinhood and platforms like that. And again, I don't think they're going to be around for too much longer. Platforms that I do like would be the opposite of that, right? So where you can go and get everything done. In finance, we used to call it, and maybe it's not the right term to use on a podcast, so I'm just going to say it, but like one throat to choke, meaning that like you can literally go and do everything with them. Your 401k would be there, your brokerage account would be there, your 529, your HSA. I'm actually not too big of a fan of Vanguard. I probably put them last in terms of people who I recommend, but I love Fidelity. So Fidelity is great. They have everything you can ever possibly want. They have ETFs, they have mutual funds, they have low fees. They likely have your 401k. You can open up a brokerage account, 529. And then you have places like Charles Schwab. Also, they've been around for a long period of time. They've earned their stripes. They've been through the financial crisis of like 01, 08, even COVID. Like they know what they're doing. And then you have companies like TIA and Principal, right? These are all companies where you can get everything you want, all the investments. You can log into the platform. They have apps. If you call them, you're going to talk to a licensed representative. I only know because I used to be one, right? And they're competent. They know what they're talking about, and you can get your questions answered. And then if you want to call in and say, hey, Vanguard person, like I need to figure out what to invest in, and I have this account, they can literally tell you some options. A lot of them aren't financial advisors, but they are licensed to be able to tell you, hey, here are the investments that you should consider, right? You can't do that at Robinhood. You can't do that with like companies like Acorns, right? But you can do that at these full service, what they call brokerage firms. So that's the companies that I would probably lean towards. Again, not Robinhood, Fidelity, TIA, Charles Schwab, Principal. Those would probably be some of my favorite, including Vanguard as well.
So Can you talk a little bit about the expenses that would be charged somewhere like Fidelity or Schwab compared to like the expenses of a financial advisor? Because you can get a financial advisor assigned to your portfolio at Schwab, right? But you may not need that, number one, and the cost could be different. So can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So you have a couple different ways of getting a financial advisor at some of these firms. So traditionally, what they charge is 0.30%, or what they call 30 basis points is what they typically call it in the industry. So if you hear that, that's what it means. So 0.30%, not 30%, 0.30. If you have a financial advisor at some of these firms, that's what they charge, but they're not solely dedicated to you. Meaning that if you call in, you might have one person, but then the next time you call in, you might get someone else on that team, right? That's the reason why they can charge a lower rate, because they basically have a pod of people. Another way of getting a quote unquote financial advisor is doing something what they call like a robo advisor, which is not an actual person. Your portfolio is being created by an algorithm based off the information you provide to them. And then they create the asset allocation or the mix of stocks and bonds. That tends to be a little bit cheaper than actually having a person aligned. You compare that to having a formal financial advisor, they're charging 1% of how much money you have. So that's 70 basis points, or 0.70, more than what you would pay if you had just a pod of people that, they're helping out. So it's just something you want to consider. And then the fee that you will pay just for your self-managing, and you have different investments. Typically, a fund might be 0.10, so 10 basis points under management that you would have to pay. So when you're considering, okay, which one do I go with? Again, it comes down to time and money, right? If you have less time and more money, you want to consider a financial advisor. And I'm talking like $500,000 to $1 million. I would say maybe it might make sense to talk to a financial advisor. But if you are at a point where you have a little money or just a little bit of time, then you can maybe consider like getting like a robo or having a pod of financial advisors that help out. But if you're just getting started, I would say go ahead and self-manage, because not only going to be cheaper, you're also going to learn how to go about doing it, right? Because my whole thing is, even when it comes to my car, I much rather be an educated consumer than anything, right? I can always go and get my brakes changed and my oil changed and like all these things done with my car, but I want to understand how to do it first, because then I feel better paying someone to do it. Even when it comes to my business, I much rather go and build all the things. I'll build them first, because then I understand the value. So that way, if someone comes to me and say, hey, like, I'm going to run your Facebook ads, but I'm going to charge you $50,000 in order to do it, I could be like, no, like, not at all. It's not that complicated. I could do it myself, but I choose to delegate it to someone else, right? So then you understand the value. I think it's very important with investing the same way. Yeah. So if you ever work with a financial advisor who's saying, hey, like, I want to charge 1%, you could say, okay, well, I understand all the things you're going to be doing for me, and I can't do it myself because, again, like, I don't have the time. Then you can go and delegate it to that person. I think it's important for that reason. And then also it's important because you want to be able to teach this to your children, right? Because you don't want to be at a point where you have to rely on someone else for your wealth. Like, you should understand not everything the financial advisor is doing, but you should be able to self-manage your money in a way where you're choosing to delegate to them, not because you have to, because you want to. Yeah. So I think that's incredibly important just from like an education standpoint.
Yeah, I think you shared some amazing information there. This is a total sidebar, but do you remember when you would have to pay a fee every time you purchased a share of a company or stock? I don't know why I thought of that, but I remember that.
Yeah. Certain companies, I didn't really experience it because Vanguard was commission free. They were like one of the first in the industry to do it. Shout out to Jack Bogle, the founder of Vanguard, for being like one of the first to do that. But yeah, you would pay a commission, because what would happen is you would buy in, then you'd have some person you don't know go and like place the orders and all that stuff, and you have to pay that person, right? And then that was part of their compensation. But now these companies have restructured how they go about paying their employees. Then also they were able to lower their fees. So places like Fidelity, for example, they have zero cost ETFs and mutual funds. They have zero cost investments. Not all of them, but they have them. Because for them, it's like, hey, like you can get all that for free. But what we're going to do, I'm like telling the inside tips and inside secrets of the investment management. What they do is they'll bring you in and then they'll try to cross sell you on other things like, oh, you should probably get a financial advisor. Oh, you should build like a wealth plan. Oh, you should do this. Right. And that's where they make the majority of their money. So, but yeah, back in the day, you would have to pay that. There's other things too. Right. And a lot of times I try to unravel this with like my community, because traditional investing, when you think about like movies like Wall Street and like even Wolf of Wall Street, all that happened years ago. Getting access to certain investments, you would have to have certain minimums. You would have to have $5,000 to invest or $3,000, or you need to talk to a broker and had to be like your father's like golf buddy and all that stuff. That's how it used to work. Now you can go like right now, it's 2:00 right now as we're recording. Within the next 5 minutes, you can open up an account, you can fund the account, and you can buy into the ETFs and mutual funds we were talking about during this podcast and be completely done with it before 4 p.m. Eastern. But if you try to execute on that back in the 70s, it would be this incredibly complicated process. And I think that's what we're dealing with right now, is because our parents were born into all that. So they have told us, hey, like investing is difficult. Investing is not for us. And that's very much not the reality right now, where anyone right now can be an investor for as little as $1.
Yeah.
If you have $1, you can become an investor.
I love where we're heading with it, right? And I think a lot of people who never thought investing was possible for them could really get started, and it doesn't have to be complicated. And I think we've really expressed that in this episode. So I'm happy about that. I do want to just share a little tidbit for people listening. So my dad actually, he passed away when I was 24, but he started and ran a publicly traded company. So I learned a lot more early on. I wish I paid more attention. Like I wish I actually listened to what he had helped me try to understand. But I remember he like got me set up with a Schwab account, and 5,000 was the minimum. Like with Schwab, where now, you know, it's very different, but he got me set up with that. And some of the conversations we had right before he passed, we were looking at the same stocks together and like getting excited about it. And I really appreciated that experience with him. And I think now we're moving into a place where anybody can do that with their own kids. And it's really exciting to think about.
No, I love that. And that's like literally dad goals right there, where I just my child and be like, hey, here's this like stock and how it works. And here's this index fund. So I love that. And the good thing about it is like, it kind of going back to what I was saying, because your dad understood how it worked, he was able to then, because imagine if he just delegated that to a financial advisor and said, hey, like, I'm not going to learn how to go about doing it. Chances are you wouldn't have gotten into the spot where you're like, okay, well, I feel comfortable with investing. Not only that, you're impacting thousands of people who are listening, and they're learning about investing and money management, all these things that came from your dad self-educating. Yeah. So for the people who are listening, I encourage you to go and not only learn, but to also teach your kids or nieces and nephews. Like I don't have any kids yet, but like I have nieces and nephews that are always in my pocket. And I'm like, let me teach you how to go about investing. Let me teach you how to generate money, because the fact that I know that, I could teach it to them. And then when they have children or grandchildren, that's really how it happens, right? So each one. So I love that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And like we can do a lot as a society, as a community, just educating others. So now, before we wrap, can you share like what's next for you, for BetterWallet? What are you working on? Just fill us in a little bit.
Yeah, one thing I'm like very, very passionate about. So the way that we relate is that we both have lost parents, I would say like early in life. My dad passed like 13 years ago. But one thing that I always promised myself that I would do is start a scholarship fund for my high school, and then also teach financial literacy to the parents. So my journey started after I obviously left my hometown and things have kind of taken off. But one thing I want to do next year is going back to my hometown and educating the people in my hometown about investing in money management. Because a lot of what we're dealing with in my town is a byproduct of not having great money management. So I want to make sure I'm doing that. And then the scholarship fund is one that I'm going to name after my dad in order to help kids go off to college. Because as I mentioned, like I had to go to college and I didn't know anything about scholarships. I didn't know anything about like loans and interest and all that stuff. And oh, by the way, it was like 2008 and 2009 is when I went to school, which was like in the middle of the housing crisis. So I would have loved to even have an additional $2,000, $3,000 to help with books. So I'm building that out. I'm going through the entire process of like building out the scholarship, but that's something that I hope to launch next year. So in terms of like prioritization, those two things are most important for me in the new year.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, please let me know if there's anything I could do to help or share. I would love to. That's awesome.
I appreciate it. Yeah. It's definitely more challenging than what I thought it was going to be in terms of like the scholarship, but we're going to make it happen. We'll push. And the good thing about it is like once I learn, then I can teach others.
Self-educating. We just talked about that. Yep. So how and where can listeners connect with you if they want to follow you or listen to what you have to say? Where can they go?
Absolutely. So we are on all things BetterWallet. So Instagram, BetterWallet, BetterWallet, as well as TikTok. You won't see me dancing on TikTok, but you'll have a lot of great financial information on TikTok. Also on YouTube as well. And my whole role is when you go and you follow me on any platform that you choose, I want you to go and send me a DM. Send me a DM, introduce yourself. My grandmother, I call her Mama. Mama would always say, like, if you come into the house, make sure you say hi to the person that lives there, right? So when you go and you follow the page, just say hi and help me to understand like what your financial goals are so I can point you in the right direction. And then, there's things that we also offer, like a lot of free things. So we have a free financial checklist. So a lot of what I talk about today, where you're just like, hey, like I have no clue how the money, help me. Like, I don't even know where to start. I built a complete financial checklist so you can learn exactly what to do with your money. And then we also hold a free investing class where if you're like, hey, finance and investing, that's like Mandarin to me or whatever language you don't know. I would need someone to break it down to me as if I'm a small child or even a golden retriever. We hold that class for folks like you who are just like, hey, like I want to learn, but I don't know where to start. So check us out. All that's in the link in my bio under BetterWallet on Instagram.
Awesome. Well, I'll definitely link to your Instagram profile in the show notes so people can easily find you. But Marc, thank you so much for being here. It was such a good conversation. And I think people who are listening really can set investing as a goal for this year and many more. So thanks so much.
You got it. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much for letting me be the money coach in your ear today. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the City Girl Savings Podcast and you feel empowered and motivated to take the next step in the journey to your dream life. Remember, if someone like me, a millennial who loves to travel, new experiences, and iced coffees can live a life they love on a budget, you can too.